Let us begin with the environmental series, and we are starting with the benefits and threats to biodiversity now. So what are the benefits of biodiversity? We discussed what is biodiversity and its types earlier. So the main benefit, it acts as the source of food and improved variety. Human food is entirely obtained from living world. We have several thousands of species of edible plants, but only less than 20 plant species are cultivated to produce about 85% of the world's food, like paddy and then wheat, etc. We produce only 20 type of cultivate only 20 plant species for about 85% of the world food. Rest 15 it's obtained from animals like meat, etc. Improved variety of crop plants and domestic animals are the backbone of modern agriculture, and wild relatives of crop plants and useful animals are essential for regular production of high yielding and disease resistant varieties. So if there is increased diversity, which means increased source of food variety to human beings and even the other animals also. So the next use is drug and medicine. It can be used even to produce some drug. Biodiversity has many medicinal uses. A number of substances with therapeutic property are obtained from plants. Example, morphine, used as an analgesic and is obtained from Cinchona ledgeriana tree. This is a kind of tree from which we obtain morphine, which is used as analgesic. So the next benefit is it's for aesthetic and cultural benefit. Biodiversity provides a good deal of fun and recreation. Example like ecotourism, bird watching, wildlife gardening, etc. are some of the example of aesthetic rewards of biodiversity. Biodiversity is also related to our cultural and religious belief. Even for recreational purposes, it's helpful. For example, we go to some we plan for some trip or something to areas which are aesthetic. We visit forest, sometimes hilly areas for ecotourism and other things, other purposes. So plants and animals, they are considered to be symbols of aesthetic rewards. For our cultural heritage. And then we can see an example, Okoimus sanctum, which is Tulsi. It is considered as a sacred and we worship, and it's been worshipped by many people in India. It has many medicinal benefit also. So the next use is about the ecosystem services. Biodiversity is essential to keep natural cycle going and making the ecosystem a self-sustaining unit. Some of the services are maintenance of gaseous composition of the atmosphere, and then climate control of forest and oceanic system, natural pest control, formation and protection of soil, nutrient cycle. So these are some of the ecosystem services provided due to biodiversity. The diversity helps in maintaining the gaseous composition, nutrient cycle, formation of soil, etc. So now let's look into the threats to biodiversity. What are the threats? First one being destruction of habitat. A primary threat to biodiversity in many parts of the world, natural habitats which protect natural flora and fauna are being converted to human settlement, cropland, dam and mining sites. So destruction of habitat. What is this is the primary threat. Many flora and fauna are being converted to human settlement. This is called destruction of habitat. So the next threat is about the habitat fragmentation, the process where a large continuous area of habitat, for example a big forest. Here if a farmer owns or cultivates a land, then there will be some gap. Here another farmer may get another land, here another farmer, or here we have some human settlement. So this particular land is being fragmented. So this will limit the dispersal and colonization potential of the species and also reduces the foraging ability of animals. So the next threat is that disturbance and pollution. Natural as well as man-made disturbance such as fire, tree fall, defoliation, release of radiation, oil spill in water body, eutrophication, nutrient enrichment, etc. affect community adversely. Environmental pollution also moves up food chain and further affects the rest of these species in the food web. So environmental pollution is one of the important threat to the species and it also affects the food web. And we might also get disturbance like fire, oil spill, etc. So the next threat is about the introduction of exotic species like alien species. It might cause significant loss to the biodiversity community because if some plants are here growing and if we introduce a foreign plant here, this particular new foreign plant might utilize all the nutrients and this might affect all our nearby older plants. So these species if successful in the new area, they might kill or eat the native species in the point of extinction or may alter the habitat that many natives are no longer able to persist. So these things might happen. So next one topic is about the biodiversity conservation strategy. Now we saw these are the threats. Now how can we conserve them? So there are two ways. One is in situ and the other one being ex situ conservation. In situ means protecting those animals and species in their own native land, which is in situ. Ex situ is taking them or transferring them to some external place outside area and then protecting them there. This is ex situ conservation. Inside the in situ will have protected area network, that is all the sacred groves, sacred lake, biosphere reserve, national park, wildlife sanctuary. These things are in situ. So in their own native land, the species are being protected. In the biosphere reserve, we have two types like terrestrial and marine. Sorry. So first let's look about the in situ conservation. It refers to the conservation of biological diversity in their natural habitat through protection of total ecosystem. So in this, it refers to the conservation of biological diversity in their natural habitat. Biological diversity is being conserved through protection of total ecosystem. So first one is protected area. These areas of land or sea especially dedicated to the protection and maintenance of biological diversity and of natural and associated cultural resources. The protected areas are managed through legal or other effective means. So protected area is something, this is meant for protection and maintenance in the natural area itself, and it's managed by legal means. If someone violates that rule, they will have to face legal charges or something. So the next one is called national park. This is also an area which is strictly reserved for welfare of wildlife, where activities such as forestry, grazing and cultivation are not allowed. Private ownership right and habitat manipulation are not permitted in a national park. So national park is something which is very protective and no human activity is allowed there without getting permission. Now, some of the national park example we can see later. Next one is about the wildlife sanctuary. This is also an area which is reserved only for the conservation of wildlife sanctuary. This is meant especially for the animals. Operations such as harvesting of timber, collection of minor forest produce, and private ownership are allowed provided they do none effect of the animals adversely. So, in the national park, private ownership or some human activity like collection of timber were not allowed. Whereas in case of wildlife sanctuary, it is allowed, but this should not affect the animals living or surviving there. This is the condition. So there were around 500 wildlife sanctuaries in India. So we can look at some of the wildlife sanctuary also little later. And the next one is about the conservation reserve. What is this? Protected area of India, which typically act as buffer zone or as connector and migration corridor. So this is kind of buffer zone which is acting as a connector. Between the national park, wildlife sanctuary and the reserved and protected areas of India. So this particular thing has been first introduced in the Wildlife Protection Act 2002. As of December 2020, there were 92 conservation reserves, 163 community reserves in India. 92 conservation reserve and 163 community reserve. So now let's look at what is community reserve. So this is also similar to conservation reserve, but the area held by private individual or group. Community, the word here, the meaning itself conveys it is managed by a community of people, which is private. Conservation reserve is managed by the government. Next one is Biosphere Reserve. The MAP program, that is the Man and the Biosphere Reserve program of UNESCO, formulated the concept of Biosphere Reserve in 1971. It also deals with the conservation of ecosystem and the genetic resource contained therein. There are 18 biosphere reserves in India, of which 11 are part of UNESCO MAP program. So basically there are 18 biosphere reserves, 11 of them are in the under the MAP program. This one also we will look at all the tables later. So the next one is about the zonation of biosphere reserve. If this is a particular biosphere reserve, it is divided into many zones. Now let's look into each one. The central area, this one is called core zone or natural zone. This particular area. So it comprises of undisturbed and legally protected ecosystem. And the next one is buffer zone. So this is the core area. Around this we have this buffer zone. It surrounds the core area and is managed to accommodate a greater variety of resources. Use strategy and research and educational activities. So in the buffer zone we allow selected activity, like if someone asks for some research or educational purpose, they will be allowed here. So this is the buffer zone. And outermost area, this one is called transition zone. So this is the core zone, buffer zone and transition zone. It is the outermost part of the biosphere reserve. It serves as an area of active cooperation between the reserves, area of active cooperation between the reserve management and the local people, wherein activities like settlement, cropping, forest and recreation and other economic use, they continue in harmony with the conservation goals. So the other human activity is allowed in the transition zone. So this is that particular diagram. Zonation of terrestrial biosphere reserve. Inside we have core zone. Here the important animals are protected. Then this is the buffer zone. Here educational and research activity alone are allowed. And in the transition zone, it's like for human activities, it is allowed to some extent. Now let us look into the comparison between the national park, wildlife sanctuary and the biosphere reserve. The first one is the NPWS and BR. Attention is not given to community as a whole. Rather, conservation is connected to habitat for particular wild animal. Species such as lion, tiger, etc. are being protected here. So here not a community of organisms are concerned, but selected species have been conserved here. Attention is given here. Whereas in case of wildlife sanctuary, the attention is given to community as a whole, and conservation is rather species oriented. So even here the attention is not given to community as a whole. Here it is habitat oriented, whereas here it is species oriented like fisher plant, GIB, etc. Whereas in case of biosphere reserve, attention is focused on community, that is biotic community as a whole. This conservation is an ecosystem oriented. So here it is habitat, species and community oriented, NPWS and BR. So here the approach is not based on scientific principle. Even here the approach is not based on scientific principle. Here the approach is based on sound scientific principle. The size ranges from 0.04 to 3162 square kilometer. Here it is slightly bigger, 0.61 to 7818 square kilometer, and here it has some medium range size, that is 5670 kilometer square, and the boundaries are circumscribed by state legislation. So here state will decide its boundary, and here the boundary is not sacrosanct. They may anytime extend or reduce it. Here the boundaries are circumscribed by the state legislation. So both national park and biosphere reserve are by state legislation, whereas in case of wildlife sanctuary it is not sacrosanct. And no biotic interference permissible except in buffer zone. So biotic interference is not allowed here. Here limited biotic interference is allowed, and here it is not allowed except in buffer zone. So both these things are more or less similar, national park and biosphere reserve. And here tourism is permitted and it also encouraged. Here tourism is permitted, whereas in case of biosphere reserve, here this one is different. Tourism is not permissible in biosphere reserve. So what about the research and scientific activity? So scientific and research management is lacking in both these areas, whereas in case of biosphere reserve it is carried out. And the last point is due attention is not given to gene pool conservation of economic species, particularly plants. Here proper attention not given to gene pool conservation of economic species, particularly plants. So in both these things gene pool conservation is not carried out, whereas in case of biosphere reserve gene pool conservation is happening. So let's look about the sacred forest or lake. There has been traditional practice in India to maintain sacred forests and lake to protect the biodiversity. The sacred forest or lake are protected by tribal community and local people due to religious sanctity. So these are like a kind of sacred, they are considered as sacred forest which has some superficial or supernatural power or force living there, and it's being worshipped by the local community there, and they protect that particular kind of forest or lake. Example, Kishio Paldri Lake. It is in Sikkim. It has been declared sacred by the people to save aquatic life from degradation. So in the name of sacred, they tend to protect them. So the next topic is about the ex-situ conservation. What is this ex-situ conservation? As we already discussed, it refers to the conservation of biodiversity at places away from their natural habitat. If protection is given in natural habitat itself, it is in situ. If it is taken to some other external place and then protected, it is ex situ. These include botanical gardens, zoos, genetic resource center, pollen grain, DNA bank, etc. So what is this seed gene bank or germplasm bank? What is this one? So these are the easiest way to store germplasm of wild and cultivated plants in low temperature in cold room at ultra low temperature called cryopreservation. So cryo means cold. So protecting the germplasm of the plants in a very cold room is called cryopreservation. That is, it will be around minus 80 degrees Celsius using solid carbon dioxide, or minus 196 degrees Celsius using liquid nitrogen. So these are things which will keep them in the very low temperature. There the germplasm or seeds are being protected for seed gene bank. So the next one is genetic resource bank. What is this genetic resource bank? National Wildlife Genetic Resource Bank was inaugurated at the Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology (CCMB) lab of conservation of endangered species, that is LACONS facility in Hyderabad. So this is being facilitated in Hyderabad, and what's the other place? And Telangana. So it is India's first genetic resource bank. It is in Hyderabad. It is in Hyderabad in Telangana. So the National Gene Bank at National Bureau of Plant Genetic Resource (NBPGR) Delhi is primarily responsible for conservation of unique accession on long-term basis as base collection for posterity, predominantly in the form of seeds. So NBPGR, it is in Delhi. They help to conserve unique accession in long-term basis. And the next one is about the botanical garden. Botanical garden, we all would have visited it, where aesthetically they used to arrange all the plants especially, and also they conserve certain species. It refers to scientifically planned collection of living trees, shrubs, herbs, climbers and other plants from various parts of the globe. Just like we have zoo for animals, we have botanical gardens for plants. Zoo is an establishment, whether stationary or mobile, where captive animals are kept for exhibition to public, and also aims to conserve endangered animals through captive breeding program. So zoo, it is of two types. One, either animals will be inside the cage and we can move and visit it, or the animals will be in open space and we will be given a protective vehicle kind of thing. We can roam inside and see the animals. So these are two types. Zoo is about caging the animals. So the next topic is about the biodiversity hotspot. A biodiversity hotspot is a biogeographic region with significant reservoir of biodiversity that is under threat from human. So if human being threat is there to a particular region which is of significance, then it's called biodiversity hotspot. Norman Myers wrote about the concept. What are the criteria, eligibility criteria to declare a site as biodiversity hotspot? First, it must contain at least 0.5% or 1500 species of vascular plant as endemic. This is important. It has to be endemic species. Endemic means the plant or a particular animal is belonging to that region. It is originating in that region only. It has to have lost at least 70% of its primary vegetation. So at least 70% of primary vegetation must have been lost. It must have 30% or less of its original natural vegetation. At world level, there are 35 biodiversity hotspots throughout the world. So there are 35 hotspots. These sites support nearly 60% of the world's plant, bird, mammal, reptile and amphibian species with a very high share of endemic species. So there are a high share of endemic species which account for 60% of the species. And there are 35 such biodiversity hotspots in the world. So we'll look at their list later. Now first one is Western Ghats, biodiversity conservation hotspot. So in India we have Western Ghats being included in this. A UNESCO World Heritage Site as well as biodiversity hotspot, Western Ghats. It is a WHS and also hotspot. Due to the presence of large number of endemic flora and fauna species along with several undiscovered species. Now what are the various committees being formed on Western Ghats? Two committees are formed. One is Gadgil and the other one is Kasturi Rangan. Let's look at their reports. So Gadgil committee reported that it's also known as Western Ghats Ecology Expert Panel. It identifies the entire Western Ghats as ecologically sensitive zone or area. So it declared the Western Ghats ranges as ESA. It recommended for putting in place a blanket ban on all activity that might harm the environment. So it put a blanket ban on all human activity like pesticide use and GM crop. And it also recommended for setting up of national level Western Ghats Ecological Authority. That is, it recommended the establishment of ESA service, just like civil service and engineering service. They asked for environmental services separately. And what did the Kasturi Rangan report said? It marks only 37% of area should be considered as ESA. So they said not all the entire Western Ghats, just 37% is ESA. And it also recommended restriction only for highly damaging activity like mining and quarrying. So they said you can carry out certain minor activity like pesticide and GM crop cultivation and all. Only major damage causing activity should be avoided. This is the report of Kasturi Rangan. It recommended for strengthening the existing framework of environmental clearances and setting up of monitoring agencies. So they set for strengthening the EPA and other clearance activity and monitoring agency. So these were the various recommendations. That's all. Thank you.